Salamun alaikum, peace be upon you, and thank you for including me in this year's panel of speakers. The theme of this year's retreat, Islam is for critical thinkers. That theme is very dear to me, and I hope today I can provide you some food for your critical thought. The title of my presentation is The Radical Dissociation Strategy in Islamic Reform. It is a proposition to challenge the hegemony of the traditional narrative of Islam and to undermine the power of Islamofascism. I will explain these terms in due course. So before we begin the presentation proper, it's good for us to familiarize ourselves with the concepts which I'm going to use, just so we can get on the same wavelength, as it were. We should start with the phrase Islamic reform. Islam is a very widely used word. You know, it refers to a culture, a religion, a civilization. Even there are some things called Islamic names. My name, Farouk, that is an Islamic name. I even saw a book called Islamic Cooking. So it is actually literally a world of Islam, if you like. Islam refers to a complex set of human activity which is very difficult to define except in the broadest terms possible. So I call it the world of Islam. But today we will be looking at the religion of Islam, a specific stream of thought within the world of Islam, the religion of Islam, specifically Islamic texts, and how we can reform this Islamic text. Which brings us to the second word, reform. Reform is a very contentious word. When people say Islamic reform, they say, whoa, Islam doesn't need to be reformed. It's already perfect the way it is. I do agree to a certain point. I do believe that Islam is essentially perfect. My interpretation of Islam is not perfect. And the mainstream interpretation of Islam is far from perfect. That's my opinion. When I say reform, I don't mean to conform. It's not to get with the times, as it were. I don't believe that, because the era we live in is always a human construct anyway. So why should the essence try to conform with the construct? It shouldn't be the case. Rather, reform is to correct what has been deformed, what has been pushed and pulled to such an extent that it no longer resembles what it should have been. So reform is literally to reform. So when you say, for example, to re-examine, that's to examine again. So when I say reform, it's not just reform, it's reform. It's to bring back to its original form, just so it can be the way it was in its original spirit. And I do feel that if there is any ideology in the world which is antithetical to its original spirit, that ideology is Islam. Islam looks nothing like what it should be. That's my humble opinion. So that is Islamic reform. Now we deal with the forces which are deforming Islam. What is that force called? Well, there is something within the Islamic tradition, and the Islamic tradition is written by human beings who are interpreting divine revelation, and they have interpreted it in such a way that Islam has become a system of oppression. I call the system Islamofascism. It's not my particular term. I define it in that way, and I say that Islamofascism is the system of oppression within the tradition of Islam. Is it essentially Islamic? Is it Islam in its original form? Absolutely not. I do not believe it is Islam in its original form, and now it has manifested in the most heinous, most evil way possible, in the form of jihadism. We hear the news now about the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, ISIS, and the kinds of things they do. Well, I say these people are the worst manifestation of Islamofascism. And until we engage with the traditions within Islamofascism, we will not be able to undermine ISIS. So now let's look at a particular tradition which I feel is probably the worst of Islamofascism. And there is a reason. I'm not just going to quote this for you for shock value. There is a reason for this. Let's have a look. The Messenger of Allah allegedly said, "I have been commanded to fight against the people until they testify that there is no God except Allah and Muhammad is his messenger." That's the Shahadatain, the two Shahada. To establish the prayers perfectly, to give charity. And if they do this, their blood, this is the word there, the blood and properties will remain safe from me except for Islamic law and their reckoning on Judgment Day. Heinous, heinous. I mean, when I first read this is not my first time, but when I first read this, I was shocked beyond belief. I asked scholars who believed in this, and they did not actually give any kind of solution. They said, well, back then it was okay. Really? Back then it was okay? I mean, was the Messenger of Allah any time like this? If he was, I don't want to be part of this. But no, actually jihadists use this today. So it is a present tradition, and it is in Sahih al-Bukhari, which is called the second most authentic book after the book of Allah, the Quran. But let me just say this. No text in the world can convince me of this. For me, the rejection of this comes because I'm a Quranist. When I read the Quran, it is completely the opposite of this particular tradition. So there's no way I would accept this anyway. But for those who have not read the Quran, there is, and they do have something within them, they will say, no, we don't believe in this as well. And such people are those who will begin to reform Islam. So this is what I'd like to talk about next. Right now, there are people who read this and they say, okay, well, no, we don't agree with this. There is something wrong here. Either you're misreading. It's possible I'm misreading, although I have checked with several scholars. Seems quite legit so far that it is actually there. Not that it's Islamic, but it's actually there. But there is something within us which tells us that no, this is not Islamic. What is that thing? Some people will call it their intuition. Some people will say their inner voice. Some people say God is guiding them to reject something like this. But as far as I understand from the Quran, it is called ayat fil anfus, signs in the souls. And it is in chapter 41, verse 53. And these signs, they verify that revelation is indeed the truth. So when you have these signs in the souls and you read the Quran, they resonate, they chime, and they tell you that the Quran is the truth. These very signs will also tell you that this particular hadith is not the truth. So this is what we need to understand. This is the first impulse towards reform. When we understand this, we will understand the need for reform. Now the conservative will tell us, oh no, you're just following your desire. The text is very clear. That is what it means. But actually no, the Quran does actually have room for signs in the soul. It could well be that we are deluding ourselves, but I don't think so. I think when we read the Quran, it's very clearly against something like this. The most obvious statement is chapter 2, verse 256, which begins with, there is no compulsion in the religion. La ikraha fid deen. There is no compulsion in the religion. So therefore the messenger could not have said something like this. That's fine. But this is the first impulse towards reform. Now we understand where reform comes from. Reform is something which is legitimate. It is something which has been delegitimized and disempowered because of authority. This is something which we need to recover. So there are two strategies, And in the next part, inshallah, I will be talking about the two strategies of Islamic reform.